Clive Blackwood. Welcome to Profile.
Thanks, Archie. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Thanks for joining us. And you are the Executive Vice President and General Auditor of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. For people who are not as familiar with what the bank does, what does the bank do?
Well, the bank is responsible, broadly speaking, for executing the operations that support monetary policy in the United States. But it does much more than that, too. We're a bank for other foreign central banks, so we provide U.S. dollar banking services to other central banks. We assist in running the nation's payment system. So there are a broad array of services that we provide to both commercial banks and other central banks.
What's your role specifically?
My role is really around looking at the bank's operations, reviewing the bank's operations on a continuous basis, and providing what we call reasonable assurance to key stakeholders such as the bank's board of directors, the folks in Washington, D.C. at the Federal Reserve Board of Governors who have an oversight role over the bank, and others, senior management, that the operations of the bank are being run in an effective, efficient, and well-controlled manner. So I report directly to the bank's board of directors. We have a board of directors made of external folks, and I report directly to them in providing that assurance.
And this is a huge deal because banking is at the center of financial systems overall. So everyone is watching whether these banks are operating the way they ought to operate. And New York is a huge state. So you're talking about a massive monitoring mechanism looking at the balance sheet of the bank and how the bank is operating overall.
This is true. So there are 12 reserve banks, and of the 12, New York is the largest. So in New York, we're responsible for, as I said before, executing the operations that support monetary policy in the U.S. So up to recently, the size of the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve System was around approximately $8.5 trillion. Most of that value results from the work that we do at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And we also are responsible for supervising, which is really ensuring that the largest banks in the U.S., most of the largest banks in the U.S., are operating in a way that's safe and sound. So with New York and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York does play a pivotal role in the U.S. economy.
So, huge role. The first black man to hold that position ever. When you look at your journey and the journey that brought you here, how do you feel?
I feel good. But I think this should also be borne in perspective. I'm not without ego, so I do think that I've earned the role that I'm in. But I think the fact that I'm in the role, too, is also a reflection of the advances that the society has made in terms of discrimination and providing people opportunities based on competence, based on merit. So there were probably folks before me over 100 years ago who should have been considered and weren't. So the fact that I am in the role that I'm in is both a reflection of, I think, my own abilities, but also the fact that as a society, the U.S. has progressed to giving people who look like me and sound like me a chance at doing important things for the country.
I want to investigate that idea a little later on when I talk about the transition from Jamaica into the United States, because, one of the things that strikes me, especially from Jamaicans here, is that very often we do not understand what it means to be a minority in another kind of culture, because when you look around in Jamaica, all of the people you see, or the vast majority, are black, and the vast majority look just like you. So I want to investigate that in a moment. But let's step back for a second and talk a little bit about your upbringing and what brought you here. Because at Mulgrave Lane off Sly Pen Road in Kingston, what were those circumstances like?
Well, I was born in Victoria Jubilee Hospital in West Kingston, like a lot of Kingstonians. Grew up, my initial years were spent on this road off Sly Pen Road, Mulgrave Lane, as you said. What I had were two hardworking parents, though. especially my mother. She was a domestic helper, and she also worked at the Department of Public Prosecutions, providing, she used to serve water to the lawyers, and she used to take home towels and that the lawyers use and wash them. So I've always been the beneficiary of really sterling examples of what it means to do your best and work hard every day.
She was working all the time?
All the time. She would take home clothes and she would go wash clothes. So she even had a hole between her thumb and index finger from the detergent from washing so much clothes. If you have examples like that, you should be able to actually follow them. And I like to feel, she's deceased now, but I like to feel that if she were alive, she would see the fruits of her labor in terms of providing an example that has made me what I am today.
What about your father?
He was a factory worker at Berger Paints, a really solid person too. I speak about my mom, but that doesn't mean that I didn't have a great father. It's just that I tended to be close, as a lot of boys are. I tended to be closer to my mother. But it doesn't mean that I love my father and that he didn't provide a good example for me.
Was it just the example they were setting for you, or were they also having those kinds of conversations in which they were talking about the value of hard work and what kinds of principles were they talking about?
Both. So they would have the conversations like, we're sacrificing for you, because I went to art in high school. Even although by that time he didn't have to actually pay to go, but it was, we're sacrificing for you, we're providing uniform for you, we're providing lunch money, so you better try and do your best. You should try and do your best. If you work hard and do your best, it makes it better for you in life. So there were the conversations, but when I think of the things that I've taken away, more than the conversations help, but what's helped more than anything is the example. And so in everything I do, if I feel that I'm slacking off and not giving my best when I should, my mother comes to mind. My father too, but my mother will come to mind. I'm like, if she could wash people's clothes and do the things that she's done, you can do it too.
Mm-hmm. And in contrast, you're privileged. Your life is very different.
It is very different. A complete different environment from the one that I grew up in and the one that my parents grew up in. Living in West Kingston, going to school in West Kingston, it's completely different. So when I think of my life, nobody's life is perfect, and mine certainly is, but I don't think that I should complain a lot. I really don't. My thing is, get on with it. If there are difficulties, you find a way to deal with it and you get on with life.
I want to talk when we return after the break, because we have to take the break right now, a little bit about some of those difficulties, both in terms of schooling and then in terms of the career. But we're going to take the break right now. On Profile, we are talking to Clive Blackwood, who is Executive Vice President and General Auditor of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And, of course, he is Jamaican, first black man to hold that position. We're back with you right after these messages.